Hello, and welcome back to our Competition with China series. I'm Dr. Brendan Mulvaney, the director of the China Aerospace Studies Institute. And in this video, we will introduce the People's Liberation Army Air Force, abbreviated the PLAAF and referred to as the Plaf. The goal of this video is to provide a comprehensive introduction to the Plaf. We'll cover the Plaf's missions, operational thought, organization, training, equipment, personnel issues, and facilities. So first, let's take a look at the Plaf's major mission sets. The first mission is what they call participating in military operations in the main strategic direction. And this is a reference to Taiwan contingencies and more broadly countering U.S. intervention in any given conflict. This mission covers the wide range of operations that the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, expects the Plaf to be able to execute in a Taiwan-related scenario to include offensive and defensive counter-air, airborne operations, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or ISR, and support to ground and naval forces. Second is performing defense missions. The Central Military Commission, or CMC, tasks the Plaf with defending PRC airspace in both peacetime and wartime, with a focus of defending Beijing and China's coastal regions. Of course, other PLA services can and do play a supporting role in this mission, but it is primarily a Plaf mission. A third Plaf mission is supporting operations related to land and maritime disputes. The PLA Army and Navy are the primary services that seek to assert the CCP's territorial claims in the land and sea domains. However, the Plaf is also expected to play a supporting role in such operations by providing intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, as well as potentially supporting fires. Fourth, like other PLA services, the Plaf participates in some domestic stability missions, such as disaster relief. This is predominantly in the form of using airlift or providing pure manpower. For example, the Plaf recently supported covert relief activities in Wuhan by conducting cargo flights and transporting various PLA medical units and support units to Wuhan. And lastly, participating in an international military exchange and cooperation. For example, the Plaf participates in international operations by flying PLA peacekeeping forces to Africa using Plaf aircraft. Now, historically, this had been done using commercial Chinese airlines, and the use of actual Plaf airlift assets is a recent development. But more frequent transportation for peacekeeping operations is expected to be the new normal. A possible sixth emerging mission for the Plaf is a nuclear deterrence and counterstrike mission. The PRC has based its nuclear deterrence force primarily on its land-based ballistic missile forces for the past few decades, with the undersea component only emerging as a credible contributor to nuclear deterrence operations since 2015. However, the PRC's pursuit of a full nuclear triad through the reconstitution of a nuclear-capable bomber force has garnered attention and concern. But few have evaluated the specific part of the PRC's nuclear triad. Although the PLA has not explicitly identified nuclear deterrence and counterattack as an official Plaf mission, the fielding of the nuclear-capable H-6N and the development of a future strategic stealth bomber suggest that the Plaf is once again taking on a nuclear mission set. Now, let's look to the broad operational thought that guides how the Plaf executes those missions. Prior to the military reforms of 2015-16, the Plaf was developing a more comprehensive service strategy known as Kongtian ET, or Air and Space One System, to conduct integrated offensive and defensive operations across three domains: air, space, and cyberspace. This strategy was conceived as a means to counter the U.S. Air Force. However, the founding of the PLA's Strategic Support Force, which was given purview over space and cyberspace missions, seems to have left the Plaf struggling to find its identity and to form a strategy and operational theory perspective. With its operations focused almost solely on the air domain, the Plaf has remained focused on what it calls the three lines of control, which guide its traditional air defense, counter-air, and ground strike operations. The first line of control is the coastline of mainland China. Within that first line, they expect to have total air control and air situational awareness. Control within this line is guaranteed by an extensive network of air defense systems and air bases. The Plaf considers the airspace over mainland China as needing to be under absolute control, meaning they will be able to prevent most incursions into PRC airspace, and any intrusions that do occur will be swiftly dealt with. The second line area is the area between China, its coastline, and the first island chain, which runs from Japan to Taiwan and down through the Philippines. The Plaf exercises limited control and conduct limited strikes in this area. The extent to which these capabilities are limited in this area will likely be based on the reliable ranges of ground-based air defense. These systems should allow the PLAAF closer to total control in areas like the Bohai Gulf or around Taiwan, except at low altitudes on the east side of its mountains, whereas control will be much more limited outside of their range, where the PLAAF will have to rely on mostly combat air patrols, which cannot be sustained indefinitely, especially with the PLAAF's lack of a robust tanker fleet. In the third line area, out to the second island chain, which runs farther into the Pacific and includes Guam, the PLAAF needs to be able to conduct what it refers to as limited deterrence. In peacetime, this may mean training, such as simulating strikes by nuclear-capable H-6 bombers against U.S. targets in this area, namely Guam. In wartime, the Central Military Commission likely expects the PLAAF to translate this training into a capability to conduct limited strikes in this area. Looking at the hierarchy of the PLAAF, at the very top of the organizational chart is PLAAF headquarters. Like those of all other PLA services, the PLAAF headquarters consists of 4 departments, those being the Staff Department, Political Work Department, Logistics Department, and Equipment Department. There is also an oversight entity in the form of the Party Discipline and Inspection Committee. The PLAAF Commander and Political Commissar, both 4-star equivalents, are co-equals in leading PLAAF headquarters. However, formal decision-making authority regarding force-wide manning, training, and equipping issues resides with the PLAAF's Party Standing Committee. This Party Committee typically consists of the PLAAF Political Commissar as the Secretary and the PLAAF Commander as the Deputy Secretary. It will include several of their deputies, the heads of the 4 major departments, and the Secretary of the PLAAF Discipline and Inspection Committee. Collectively, these individuals must reach a consensus for all major decisions related to the PLAAF, and the Standing Committee meets on a regular basis. It's important to note that there is never just a single deputy commander for an operational unit or a deputy director for an academic and administrative organizations. There's always at least 2 and potentially several, and this goes all the way down to the company level. The next tier below PLAAF headquarters are the 5 Theater Command Air Forces and the several functional commands. Collectively, these entities are similar to the U.S. Air Force's MAJCOMs, which are also either functionally or geographically aligned. Let's first look at the unique functional commands. Although typically not of the same seniority as the U.S. Air Force functional MAJCOM, the PLAAF operates numerous 1- and 2-star equivalent functional commands. We can bin these commands into 2 categories. The first is education, and the second is research, development, testing, and evaluation. On the education side, rather than putting all educational and training entities under a large organization like Air Education and Training Command, or ATC, PLAAF headquarters directly oversees 11 educational and training commands that provide undergraduate as well as professional military education, flight training, and other vocational training. Collectively, these 11 organizations roughly fill the roles of AETC and the U.S. Air Force Academy. The other category is research, development, and testing and evaluation. This includes the Plaf Research Academy that conducts the preliminary research on equipment and concepts, and 2 PLAAF training bases and testing bases at Dingshan and Sangzhou that conduct force-wide testing and evaluation of equipment and concepts. On the operational side, we have the 5 geographically aligned Theater Command Air Forces that align with the PLA's 5 Joint Theater Commands. These Theater Command Air Forces ensure that PLAAF units within their geographic region are properly manned, trained, and equipped. Each Theater Command Air Force also acts as the theater's air component commander and exercises operational control over most air operations within its respective area of responsibility. Theater Command Air Forces consist of 3 major departments: a staff department, political work department, and a support department. The functions of these mirrors those that are found at the Central Military Commission, with the support department serving as a merged equivalent to the service level equipment and logistics departments. Each Theater Command Air Force typically oversees 2 to 3 air defense bases, bomber and support aircraft units, as well as ground-based support units. Air defense bases are organizations that are similar to U.S. Air Force numbered air forces. Like other PLA organizations, the term base should not be interpreted as facility, but instead as a relatively large command structure at the colonel or even up to the 2-star level. These bases are responsible for both combat operations and force building. That means that these bases care and feed for a number of fighter, surface-to-air missiles, radar brigades, as well as communications units within the region, on top of acting as a regional air defense command that oversees defensive air operations within their region. The primary bases are Shanghai and Fuzhou air defense bases which fall under the Eastern Theater Command Air Force, Nanning and Kunming under the Southern Theater Command Air Force, Lanzhou, Lhasa, and Urumqi under the Western Theater Command Air Force, Dalian and Jinan under the Northern Theater Command Air Force, and lastly Datong and Wuhan under the Central Theater Command Air Force. For certain regions of airspace that require additional command oversight, the PLAAF operates several primary and auxiliary command posts. The PLAAF currently has primary command posts overseeing airspace around Hetian and Changchun, and an auxiliary command post at Xi'an and Zhangzhou. These command posts are likely to coordinate air operations within their designated local areas, but do not administer or have operational control over any of the actual forces. Now let's take a look at how a typical fighter unit is organized. The larger fighter unit formation in the PLAAF is called a brigade. This formation is similar to a U.S. Air Force fighter group and consists of anywhere between 24 and 36 aircraft, typically divided into 3 squadron equivalents: a maintenance squadron equivalent, a repair shop, and a unit that manages the physical airfield infrastructure, which is called an airfield station. The previously mentioned squadron equivalents are battalion-level organizations that are called flight groups in the PLAAF, and each flight group is roughly divided or roughly contains 8 to 10 airframes divided into 2 company-level flight detachments, which they call squadrons, so the nomenclature gets quite messy. On average, each aviation brigade maintains a pilot-to-aircraft ratio somewhere between 1.2 and 1.5 pilots per aircraft. In addition to fighter units, the air defense bases also oversee several surface-to-air missiles, or SAMs, and radar brigades, as well as communications units. Each SAM brigade consists of at least 4 launch battalions located across geographically separated garrisons and a primary command battalion. A radar brigade consists of several battalion-level central radars, each of which oversees several fixed radar sites. Most, if not all, of the radar brigades also operate mobile radar battalions to help fill the gaps in coverage or provide additional coverage in key areas. In addition to the units that we traditionally associate with the Air Force, the PLAAF also oversees the PLA's primary airborne force in the form of the PLAF Airborne Corps. The Airborne Corps is tasked with seizing key military sites or holding off adversary military formations. This 2-star equivalent command oversees a force of 6 combined armed airborne brigades, an airborne special operations brigade, a fixed-wing transport brigade. This one transport brigade is predominantly to provide organic lift capability for training purposes and some limited operations, but other PLAF transport divisions provide the bulk of airlift for the Airborne Corps. As of 2021, we estimate that PLAF can deliver somewhere around a full mechanized brigade combat element should it use all available operational airframes in one wave. Now let us look at some of the key training highlights in the PLAF. The PLAF has continually improved its training exercises to better integrate its modern capabilities and its capacity to conduct operations. The PLAF has 5 major training events and competitions that best represent where the PLAF is today training-wise. Red Sword is the largest and is a force-wide exercise roughly commensurate with the U.S. Air Force's Red Flag. Blue Shield is an exercise designed to test the capabilities of the PLAF's ground-based air defense forces, specifically SAMs and supporting radar and information systems. The Golden Helmet Competition is an air-to-air combat competition designed to improve and assess pilot skills and capabilities in combat conditions. The Golden Dart Competition focuses on air-to-ground attack by attack and bomber aircraft. And lastly, we have Qingdian, which is their newest exercise and is focused on electronic warfare. And although there's no official English name for the Qingdian exercise, I like to refer to it as Optimus Lightning because they use the same Mandarin character as an Optimus Prime, and it sounds cool. Exercises and competitions before the early 2010s were generally scripted events that did not adequately prepare the force for the challenges of modern combat. Each one had gradually taken a step-by-step approach to allowing the pilots to use what the PLAF calls free air combat and pilot autonomy. But pilots still may not be allowed to maneuver at their own will. These exercises and competitions have grown increasingly complex and now integrate a wide range of PLA Air Force assets. For example, Red Sword has begun integrating airborne forces, along with what the U.S. would term 5th-generation aircraft, standoff and escort jamming, as well as airborne early warning capabilities. Additionally, joint and integrated air defense exercises are becoming more and more prevalent. This is exemplified by air defense units and radar units from different services passing target data to each other. In addition to the increasingly complex and competitive exercises and competitions, the PLAAF is also focusing its training in several specific disciplines. In recent years, the PLAAF has embraced a maritime mission and has begun conducting over-water training with fighter and bomber aircraft, with the bombers regularly flying beyond the first island chain. Now, the PLAAF first flew its H-6 bomber sorties into the Western Pacific in 2015, some of which were escorted by fighters. As the PLAAF trains to push farther out from China, it's been pushing authorities up into the air, including through the KJ-200, KJ-500, and KJ-2000 airborne early warning and command aircraft. Another trend is that the PLA has started more frequent training of deployment to unfamiliar airfields, civilian airfields, and to austere locations. This could take the form of units training to rapidly deploy to airfields in the South China Sea from northern China, with their logistics complement or bombers stopping at unfamiliar airfields to conduct rapid refueling. In some ways, this training mirrors many of the themes found in U.S. Air Force's concept of agile combat employment, although the PLAAF uses only sites within mainland China. Let's move on to the equipment and weapons systems that the PLAAF operates. We can't cover every single aircraft, munition, and radar that the PLAAF currently fields, but we will at least try to touch on some of the highlights. The PLAAF has undergone an impressive modernization push, focused on high-tech capabilities over the past 2 decades, and it has mostly shed its reliance on older Soviet platforms. In place of those older Soviet systems, the PLAAF has begun adopting modern or modernized airborne support aircraft, fighters, bombers, unmanned aerial vehicles, and air defense systems. As part of the PLAAF's migration away from simply performing territorial air defense missions toward having offensive and defensive capabilities, the PLAAF began expanding its inventory of support aircraft to include airborne early warning, ISR, standoff jammers, tankers, and transports. Initially, the PLAAF used the Y-8 and Y-9 medium-lift turbo airframes as the basis for many of these specialized aircraft. However, with the introduction of the Y-20 heavy-lift turbofan-powered aircraft, the PLAAF appears to be developing a newer generation of follow-on support aircraft, starting with the tanker variant called the Y-20U. The PLAAF has also undergone a rapid modernization of its fighter aircraft inventory. As a quick terminology note, the PLAAF refers to what we consider 5th generation aircraft as 4th generation, and what we define as 4th generation as 3rd generation, etc. But for consistency's sake, we will stick with Western definition of aircraft generations. The PLAAF currently views its 5th generation aircraft as the future core of their fighter fleet. The PLAAF is gradually introducing the 5th generation aircraft in the form of the J-20 to its operational force, with 2 operational units fielding the J-20 as of 2021. The PLAAF also plans for the 4th generation fighters, such as the J-10 and J-11 variants, to continue to be the main body of their force. Similar to how the U.S. Air Force used 5th generation aircraft as force enablers that use high-end sensors and capabilities to empower the 4th generation aircraft. Although the PRC domestic engines that power some of these aircraft may have shorter lifespans than their Russian equivalents, they likely have roughly similar performance specifications overall. The PLAAF equips these aircraft with a wide range of advanced munitions, to include the PL-15 long-range air-to-air missile that can reach out beyond 150 kilometers, and the commensurate sensors needed to use those munitions. To provide greater punch, the PLAAF operates a fleet of approximately 150 H-6 bombers. This is a modernized and domestically produced variant of the old Soviet Tu-16 Badger, which was first flown in 1952. The current fleet of well over 100 H-6 bombers is a mix of variants developed in the late 20th century that are all cruise missile capable but lack higher-end avionics like the H-6M and the extremely new variants like the ballistic missile capable and air refuelable H-6N, which were fielded in 2019. This bomber fleet provides the PLAAF with a robust ability to prevent sustained strikes against land, air, and maritime targets beyond the first island chain. On the unmanned side, the PLAAF has invested heavily in building up its complement of UAVs. The PLAAF operates a wide range of fixed-wing, medium, and high-altitude drones, ranging from the propeller-driven CH series to the air-launched rocket-powered WZ-8. And although many of the PLAAF's UAVs can be armed, they are predominantly still fill an intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance role. The PLAAF believes that unmanned and autonomous systems are the future of warfare, and as such, one should expect the PLAAF's inventory of UAVs to expand and for those capabilities to grow. To defend China's territorial airspace, the PLAAF maintains a large inventory of air defense assets, including ground-based electronic warfare assets, surface-to-air missiles, anti-artillery, or AAA. And broadly speaking, the PLAAF's electronic warfare asset inventory includes satellite, data link, and communications jammers, as well as systems that can degrade electro-optical and infrared systems. Its SAM inventory has now entirely phased out the older generation SAMs like the HQ-2, which was a domestically produced variant of the SA-2 guideline, and has replaced those SAMs with newer missile systems like the HQ-12 and the HQ-22, as well as longer range systems like the Russian S-300 PMU-2 and the S-400, as well as the domestically produced HQ-9 series. Select sites also operate short-range HQ-6 system for point air defenses of key facilities. To further complicate an attacking Air Force, the PLAAF also maintains a huge inventory of medium and small caliber AAA that are operated by the PLA Army Reserves. These ground-based air defense systems provide a layered defense around China that reaches out as far as 250 kilometers away from China's borders in key areas. To provide early warning and target data, the PLAAF also operates a huge network of ground-based radar stations to include several over-the-horizon radar sites. Overall, the PLAAF has three basic categories of radars, including long range, medium range, and short range, which are further categorized into low, medium, and high altitude. Today, the PLAAF has three basic types of radar sites. The first type is located at an airfield and is used primarily for air traffic control and for senior officers in the control tower to use to vector pilots toward their targets. The second type consists of radars located in key areas for long-range and medium-range detection along China's borders. Most of these radars are located on mountaintops. The third type consists of over-the-horizon radars near China's coastline that are used for early warning. And besides the over-the-horizon, the PLAAF's aviation, SAM, and AAA units also have radars that are indigenous to those units and are considered to be specialized units. Let us now move on to the people who operate those systems, the leaders and the personnel of the PLAAF. Although the PLA Air Force has not disclosed the total size of its force, most estimates place that number at around 400,000 active duty personnel, with an unknown number of reserve personnel. Due to the wide range of missions that the PLAAF must perform, from offensive counter-air to ground-based self-defense, electronic warfare to airborne operations, the PLAAF has numerous educational and training pipelines for all of its personnel. First, to look at the officers that will lead the PLAAF, there are 5 undergraduate academic institutions that provide the bulk of PLA officers. Those institutions are the PLAAF Engineering University, Aviation University, Early Warning Academy, Medical University, and Service College. Most of these officers will receive degrees in a STEM-related field, with a growing emphasis on fields related to the information technologies. Once an officer commissions into the PLAAF, they will periodically return to one of these same institutions to receive a graduate degree in their specialty. However, if they're what is called a commanding officer, which for the PLA means anyone who has a leadership position, they will then return to the PLAAF's Command College in Beijing for mid-level professional military education and only receive a certificate. At the more senior levels, PLAAF officers will attend the PLA's National Defense University for additional joint professional military education, where they also only receive a certificate. All aviators in the PLAAF are officers, and officers are ultimately responsible for command, decision-making, and leadership in the PLAAF. So when it comes to having a deep expertise on maintaining and operating systems, that responsibility falls to the PLAAF's non-commissioned officers. The PLAAF recruits non-commissioned officers or NCOs into the PLAAF either directly from candidate pools of highly skilled civilians or promoted out of the ranks of its 2-year conscripts. Now, not every NCO can attend an NCO school, and depending on their specialty, NCOs can receive formal training at one of the PLAAF's universities or academies if they have a specific NCO program. For example, the PLAAF Engineering University has an NCO program. Now, there is only one PLAAF institution that is dedicated to educating NCOs, and that is the PLAAF Communications NCO Academy. Ultimately, many of these NCOs will already have or will earn a college-level degree, although frequently this degree will be equivalent to a 2-year associate's degree in the United States. And last, let's go over the PLA's infrastructure. The PLAAF has historically built its airfields and infrastructure with a different approach than the U.S. military. Most notably, they tend to be smaller, single-unit, single-runway airfields. This has resulted in airfields that are not as survivable or well-suited to high-tempo flight operations, and which will need expansion to meet the demands of a modern Air Force. The PLAAF also has begun expanding its training and utilization of civilian airfields, which are not always well-suited to military flight operations. The Plaf has begun to enhance the resilience of its airfields by extending its runways, increasing the number of taxiways, adding additional taxiway access, and widening some of the existing taxiways. But some airfields still appear to be designed without survivability in mind. Starting in the early 2000s, the Plaf began to construct more hardened aircraft shelters. Now, historically, the PLA has relied upon underground facilities for a variety of applications, but left many of these sites in reserve status during the 80s and 90s. However, recently the PLA Air Force has begun reactivating some of these underground facilities. And the Plaf also appears to be moving toward the use of hardened or semi-hardened shelters. China is also building a large number of civilian airfields that could be used to supplement military airfields. Now, while these airfields are intended to be designed for high civilian flight operation volume in mind and are equipped with multiple runways, they still lack much of the ground support infrastructure needed to sustain military operations. To keep fueled and armed, essentially all Plaf airfields provide adjacent fuel and ordnance storage facilities. However, due to the limited size of each airfield, those storage facilities are typically smaller than those found at U.S. Air Force bases. Most of the Plaf's larger fuel and ordnance facilities are not co-located with an airfield, and the Plaf must transport material from these sites to the airfields that need them. Plaf fuel farms, in turn, are kept topped off by at least 35, if not over 50, PRC state-run petroleum refineries that provide aviation fuel. Defending PRC airspace are 100-plus fixed air-based defense sites and hundreds of fixed radar sites. Inevitably, these sites are concentrated around key regions, such as Beijing, Shanghai, the Taiwan Strait, and Guangzhou. These sites are all hardwired into a communications network using above-ground or dug-in communication lines, typically fiber optics. On top of those sites, the PLA almost certainly has designated alternate deployment sites with cable hookups for mobile SAM and radar units. In conclusion, the Plaf is now an extremely robust Air Force that can conduct sustained precision strike missions beyond the first island chain, while also defending PRC territorial airspace against even a robust adversary like the United States. Second, its training is increasingly realistic and complex, and now features combined arms as the norm rather than the exception. And third, its equipment, though still what's deficient in some technical terms, is approaching parity with, if not exceeding, the performance specifications of some U.S. Air Force weapon systems. And lastly, the recruiting and educating personnel that can operate those weapon systems to their fullest potential. We'd like to encourage you to take a look at some of the other videos in this series that address the other parts of the PLA. Just as we're approaching warfighting with an eye toward joint operations, the PLA is too. We hope this introduction to the PLA Air Force has helped you understand the threat and is encouraging you to think about ways of overcoming that threat. Thank you for watching.